I know what you're thinking. What the actual hell kind of title and thumbnail is this? Well, I can promise you it's not clickbait. I know a lot of you are probably very confused by this being the first thing you see, and I don't blame you. So, what exactly is this video about? Well, this is going to be a rather, unusual discussion, and it's really not easy to sum up, so please sit tight, bear with me, hear me out, I'll explain everything. So, I'm sure a lot of you watching are familiar with the Shantae series, in which case it hardly needs any introduction. For many years, Shantae has been my second most favorite game series of all time, only second to Skylanders. What originally started out as a small, obscure game that almost nobody heard of, to eventually becoming one of the most beloved and popular indie game franchises today. Given its history, Shantae was quite an underdog in the indie game space, though it's still relatively underrated compared to most AAA games that are far more widely well known, like Mario and Sonic and whatnot. Anyway, Shantae didn't always have the cult following and status it has nowadays. As briefly mentioned, the very first Shantae game wasn't very successful, it didn't sell very well, and very few people knew of its existence at the time, and there's a multitude of reasons as to why that is. Such as the game being stuck in development hell for 8 years before it finally released, and the dev team way forward struggling to find a publisher since indie devs had a much harder time getting their games out back then. They were lucky Capcom was willing to publish it. Also, one of the biggest factors being that Shantae came out on the Game Boy Color in 2002 near the end of the Game Boy's lifespan, and the Game Boy Advance was the hot new portable game system at the time. So yeah, not many people were really looking for new Game Boy Color games at the time. While yeah, Shantae did have GBA enhanced exclusive features that could only be unlocked when playing it on Game Boy Advance, but it was still a very niche market. Not to mention the fact that the original game was released in a fairly small quantity, so not many physical copies were made, which is probably why the original Shantae is one of the rarest and most expensive Game Boy Color games in history. Needless to say, there are quite a few factors as to why the original Shantae initially failed. Sadly, not even Nintendo Power could save it from almost fading away into obscurity. However, there is one very weird question I've had stuck in the back of my mind for years. Among the many contributing factors I mentioned, is it possible that the original Shantae's failure could have been partially affected by the devastating events of September 11, 2001? Now, I know on the surface this question makes no sense. Like, why would this have any connection or anything to do with Shantae in any way? Well, like I said, this is going to be a very unusual discussion, one that I've actually kind of wanted to talk about for years now, but wasn't sure if I should or not. Since today is September 11th, I figure it was the right time to just finally get this thing off my chest and out of my system for good. I think I've had this weird, nagging question stuck in my head ever since 2020, when WayForward and Limited Run Games had announced a physical re-release of the original Shantae on Game Boy Color, which became available for pre-order on September 11th. Not gonna lie, that was a very odd coincidental date they chose. And no, this isn't just going to be some weird-ass conspiracy theory or anything like that. Or, at least that's not the intention of this video. In fact, in this discussion, I will be covering some rather delicate topics, which I intend to treat as sensitively and respectfully as possible. I'm not making a joke out of any of this, and I'll try to word it carefully as I can, so hopefully it doesn't come off as offensive or in bad taste. This may not be easy to make sense of, but I'll try. Okay, so I think we're all well aware of the tragic events that occurred on September 11th, 2001. It was one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in history, resulting in the deaths of thousands of innocent people and leaving a permanent scar on American society to this day. Many people were affected by this in more ways than one. Amongst the many things that happened during the aftermath, one of the biggest effects it had on society was a sudden, massive surge in racist prejudice and discrimination against people of any Middle Eastern culture, heritage, or religion. Because of an extremist group that caused these horrible events, people of the same ethnicity were targeted, ostracized, and treated with unfair prejudice. Even people who weren't even from the same countries as Al-Qaeda were targeted, regardless of which country in the Middle East they're from. A lot of ignorant people who weren't familiar with their cultures just simply saw them as all the same. The attack had evoked fear in a lot of people, and when people are afraid, it can cause them to say and do bad things they normally wouldn't. As the wise Yoda said, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. As overused as that quote may be, it couldn't be any more relevant here, as the tragic events of 9/11 had really brought out the worst in people, much like how war does. Now, at this point, you're probably still wondering, what the hell does any of this have to do with Shantae? Well, I'm just about to get to that. Alongside the massive wave of prejudice against Middle Eastern people, it seemed that a lot of fictional media related to Middle Eastern culture had also become the target of discrimination as well. Many different books, movies, TV shows, and video games, etc., that either came from or were inspired by the Middle East in any way, many people basically denounced, ignored, and pretend it doesn't exist. Because it seemed that nobody wanted anything to do with Middle Eastern culture as a whole at the time. A prime example of this would be Aladdin, one of the most widely beloved Disney classics of all time. However, 10 years after its release, when the devastating events of 9/11 occurred, people started to turn against Aladdin. Many people who once loved the film for all those years then suddenly claimed they hated Aladdin. I think you get the picture here. Basically, any and all fictional media inspired by or related to Middle Eastern culture in any way, most people turned against and denounced it. And that's where we finally lead into Shantae. Now, the Shantae series is known for many things, from its beautiful retro pixel and hand-drawn visual styles, to its addictively fun Metroidvania side-scrolling gameplay, to many of its quirky, adorable, sexy, badass, lovable, and memorable characters. What's not to love about it? However, one other aspect about the Shantae series that I've always found quite fascinating, but haven't seen nearly enough people talk about, is the Middle Eastern cultural inspiration surrounding the series. I won't spend too long rambling about that. In fact, there's actually a couple of great videos by Gaijin Goomba that explains it a lot better than I could, which I highly recommend watching. One that analyzes Shantae's oriental style of belly dancing, and the other that analyzes all of the references to Turkish culture surrounding the world of the Shantae series itself. Honestly, the amount of attention to detail the devs did is quite impressive, and I say Shantae is arguably the best representation of the culture I've seen in any game period. But sadly, the world wasn't quite ready for Shantae, as she first arrived at arguably the worst possible time, not only because her first game released on a niche dying handheld system, but likely also because the original Shantae officially released on June 2nd, 2002, only less than 9 months after the tragic events of 9/11, and when the massive wave of Middle Eastern prejudice was still in full effect. But of course, there's no way forward could have foreseen those events, and once again, they've been working on Shantae since 1994. But still, given the timing of things, and that Shantae is a game heavily inspired by Middle Eastern culture, it's not hard to imagine that being a possible contributing factor to the severely little recognition it had received upon release. I don't know why, but sometimes I'd imagine back in 2002, maybe some of the few people who saw the game on a shelf, the first thing they see is this Princess Jasmine-looking Arabic belly dancer chick on the cover, and they immediately reject it and walk away. Likely while saying some highly offensive racial slurs that I will not repeat. Now, I'm not saying this is like the main reason why the original Shantae failed or anything like that. I've already discussed a bunch of the main and contributing factors as to why it failed. Though, given the circumstances I've discussed, I don't think it's too far-fetched to assume it might have been at least a small contributing factor amongst all the others. Either that, or perhaps it's all just a big coincidence and I've been overthinking it or something. I probably have. But I'm just glad I finally got this thing off my chest. To be honest, I have no idea how controversial this discussion will be, and I really hope I hadn't accidentally offended anyone in any way or made anyone feel uncomfortable or something while talking about this. I'll admit, it was a rather weirdly heavy discussion, especially since I don't usually make videos talking about serious, heavy, or sensitive topics like this, so I imagine some of my viewers aren't quite used to this sort of thing, but I don't really plan on making any more videos like this anytime soon, so I guess I'll just stick to making entertaining content if and whenever I feel like it. So, that's all I can say for now. Let me know what you guys thought of this video. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you find it weird, confusing, or just plain nonsensical or something? Well, whatever the case, I'd like to know your thoughts. That's it, I guess. Bye.